Hello, Player One. Welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. Welcome to the new year, Player One. Many of us, we reimagine ourselves to become a little better in the new year. A New Year's resolution, if you will. And games, they are no different. They want to be revitalized, revolutionized, remade, remastered, reborn, revamped, reimagined, rebooted, recycled, and, well, you get the point. So in today's episode, let's check out the history of reboots and revivals.
So, JP, would you tell me what's your favorite remakes, reboots, remaster, or what have you?
I have so many of them. I definitely do not have a favorite. Two that always stick out to me immediately when someone wants to talk about really, really good remakes is Resident Evil HD for the GameCube and also for the GameCube, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. But also, I'd like to say the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask remakes for
Okay,
the
so you have four.
3DS. They're also really, really, really good.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, remakes are awesome. Remakes are great. I love a good remake. What about you, Gabby?
Well, I definitely can talk about the one that I don't really like, which is unnecessary remasters.
Unnecessary remasters.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to go there, but talking about The Last of Us, for example, I just don't think it was that necessary.
I completely agree with you here, obviously.
I'm sorry, Player One, if you love it.
I share the same views with Gabby because, I mean, imagine if you, Player One, you have a, upcoming very successful gaming franchise on your hands and you release the first game and then the second game and then the third game. No, you're going to remake the first game again.
Yeah, I know, and in a really short span of time as well, which I feel like really is that really necessary?
Yeah, but what can you expect from a developer called Naughty Dog?
Well, they're definitely being naughty. You know what? I mean, I've got love for the developer. It just feels like a little bit of a money grabbing scheme in this case, though. I feel like, I'm sorry. Player One, I don't mean to offend you.
No.
So yeah, let's dive into the history of remakes, reboots, revivals, or you know what have you. It's too many re's, I feel like.
All
in
of
this
the
case.
re's.
Yes, all of the re's. We need to go back to the early days. And I'm not talking about the early days of the universe. That's a bit way too far.
But we are the masters of the universe. We are the Gaming History Club,
No,
Gabby.
we're not He-Man. But okay.
Yes, we are.
We're gonna go back to the early 70s. It's the early days of video games. So, back in the early 70s, we probably only had Pong machines at that time. We didn't have many more than that. It's just full of Pong clones, right?
It was a lot of Pong clones, and it's a little bit sad to think about it as being a little bit of a desert of the real. But yeah, there was Pong. There wasn't much. But I mean,
Yeah.
this is why it's the early history of video games, Player One. This is reality. We had Pong. We had a lot of Pong.
Yeah, we did. And you might be thinking that remakes didn't really exist yet, because what would you remake? It's just basically Pong, in a way. But actually, that's not true. Video games actually had their own version of remakes in the form of what's called conversions. So, conversions is basically the process of bringing a game into a different platform. Nowadays, we would call that process to be port or porting, but conversions were actually more similar to remakes because of the fast way that computer architecture technology was evolving and improving. Bringing a game to a different platform actually required an entire remake of the game.
Yeah, so if we pretend, let's do a little thought experiment. We have binary computers right now and we play video games on them. For example, Baldur's Gate 3, but now in 2026, there will be a quantum computer coming out and we can't simply just take our binary copy of Baldur's Gate 3 and stick it into the quantum computer and it's going to work. No, the entire game would have to be remade, and that is the kind of remaking that we are talking about when it comes to early video game history with these conversions, what we probably nowadays call porting instead.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, the best example of that is the game called Gunfight. So, Gunfight was originally an electromechanical arcade game that was made by Sega. If you remember, electromechanical game means there is no computing process in that. So, in Gunfight, two opposing players controlled little cowboy mannequins and would face off each other and shoot at each other through obstacles in the middle, like you have cacti in the middle, for example.
You shoot at each other. Pew pew.
Yeah, true. So,
It looks really fun, by the way.
yeah, I think the really cool thing is that like the environment are actually really involved in this
Yeah,
electromechanical
and they
game.
blow into little bits when you hit the other player. Or, well, I guess if you miss them and like the cactus, like, pew.
Yeah, so if you miss the player and you hit the cacti instead, the cacti kind of split into two. Like it has that system and mechanic inside it.
They definitely knew how to have fun before video games, let me just say. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. But yeah, okay, so what happens when you take Pong, the video game, and combine it with this Gunfight, the electromechanical game? Actually,
Hmm.
it just became another gunfight.
It just became gunfight again.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
exactly. But this time it's a video game version of it. So imagine it like Pong kind of graphic, which is very pixelated and not colored, basically. And you have two little cowboys just shoot each other on your screen. It's very simple, but really taking on that gunfight electromechanical game as the inspiration. So this version of Gunfight was made by Tomohiro Nishikado. If you remember Player One, he was probably better known for creating Space Invaders 3 years later in 1978.
Yeah, let's just casually remind player one of the legendary status that is this man, of course. But another reason why we want to talk about Gunfight is actually because it turned from a non-video game into a video game. But then, because of all this technological progression happening so quickly, this was going to happen yet again very, very quickly to Gunfight. So, what am I talking about? So, Gunfight actually came from Japan, and in Japan, it was actually known as Western Gun and was made by Taito. And the arcade cabinet basically used TTL logic. TTL as in transistor logic. That's a way that the computing was carried out. That was the brain of a computer back in those days. And when Dave Nutting from Midway then released this in the Western world, he actually put a microprocessor in it instead, an Intel 8080. And it became the very first arcade game to be run by a microprocessor now instead, which is really, really cool and fascinating. And microprocessors, if you're wondering and you're not like in the know-how, that is still like a CPU like nowadays. That is still what we use nowadays. Just to give you an idea of like what a big deal this actually is, yeah. An arcade game with a microprocessor, yeah. But Dave didn't put a microprocessor in there just for the sake of being on the cutting edge of technology. No, this actually made the animations run smoother and a lot quicker compared to the TTL logic that was used in the Japanese version of the game. Although Nishikado believed that his original was more fun. Even though he was impressed with the graphics nonetheless of Gunfight, he still thought Western Gun was a lot more fun.
So I guess this is the reality that we sometimes forget about remakes. Sometimes it is happening because it's necessary. Like what JP talked about before, if we want to play nowadays game in the quantum computer era in the future, we definitely need to remake that.
And you know what, Player One? It was very, very similar with a game that we mentioned in our previous episode already in Roll the Dice, D&D influence in video games. You will hopefully remember that we mentioned the game Adventure for the Atari 2600, right? And in Adventure, it was very similar. So we first had the Colossal Cave Adventure, which was a text-based video game. And then Atari takes that game and it remakes it with graphics now instead, right? Very similar to Gunfight. Take something without video game graphics and just put video game graphics on there. And that is a lot of how like the first, very, very first remakes looked like. They were conversions. They needed to be done.
Yeah, it's like converting to a new visual medium, basically.
Perfectly put. Yes, Gabby. That's exactly it.
And since we're talking about Tomohiro Nishikado, the creator of Gunfight and Space Invaders,
The legendary Grand Wizard.
yes, definitely that one. When Space Invaders was remade from an arcade game to the Atari 2600, we're saying remade here with verbal double quotation marks because back then they would have probably called this as a conversion, as we talked about before. So when they started doing this, right, it kind of started a trend to bring the arcade games to the second generation of home consoles. But usually it includes compromises in graphics, content, gameplay, or probably like all three.
Most likely all three, let's be honest here. I mean, the arcades, they have a lot of power compared to like the home console of the
Yeah.
Atari. Let's be honest here. Like, yeah, there's no comparison really.
Yeah, but however, it still massively helped the sale of Atari 2600 to do just that. There was an appetite to play good games in the comfort of your home. But if you wanted the really good stuff, then you really still need to go to the arcade because you wouldn't get that graphic power that you can get in the arcade. But anyway, bringing games to a different platform was more about recreating the core essence of the game from new rather than replicating it like one for the console. And yeah, today we would refer this as porting.
Yes, and I will now explain everything about the word porting to you, Gabby, that there is to know. So listen up. And you too, player one, by the way.
Yeah, I was about to say not for me only, but yeah, go
Yeah.
on.
So the term port is derived from the Latin portare, meaning to carry. And this makes sense because when we think about the code of our game, so maybe it's not compatible with our exact operating system, right? So the code must be quote unquote carried from the old system to the new system or ported. We wouldn't call ports remakes though exactly, so we wouldn't be discussing them in much detail in today's episode. But since we're already on track with some definitions, should we define the other common terms relating to this episode, Gabby?
Yeah, but before we do, I thought you have a pop quiz for this episode.
Haha, yeah, I do have a pop quiz actually. Yeah, you're right. Pop quiz player one, how many remakes do you think there's been in total? I'll let you know by the end of our definitions.
Yeah, keep your guess in mind. Okay, so let's dive into the definition of this remasters, remakes, reboots, revivals. I don't know. There are so many of them.
Recyclables?
Recyclables. Yeah. So, right. The differences are actually a little subjective, and developers themselves actually get these wrong themselves sometimes,
All the
which is
time.
quite funny.
All the time.
So, yeah. So, you know what, Player One? Don't feel bad if you ever got mixed up about this. But, let's start with the least amount of change, which is remasters. So, remasters basically are cosmetic changes that usually do not change or add to the core game gameplay or mechanics themselves. And if they do, it's usually only very little. So they're basically enhanced version of the original games and not really built brand new, rather made better.
That's right. A new polishing, you might say.
Yeah, that's true. Common examples are making 4:3 or like almost square resolution being made into widescreen or upscaling standard definition to an HD resolution. But of course, there's a lot more involved than just cranking up the resolution. Anyone experienced with emulating will know that it can simply make older games look very polygonal, let's say.
Oh yeah, I do remember Mario on Mario 64 looking extremely triangular sometimes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it just looks weird if you don't really do it properly.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
Yeah, and effects like improved lighting, shadows, reflections, and other effects are often added too in this remaster. But the key thing to take away for this remaster thing is that usually it's just cosmetic changes. They don't really tend to add new gameplay mechanic or story, and if they do, it's kind of very little, and maybe just like an extra weapon or you get an extra Easter egg somewhere in the game.
Yeah, so Resident Evil HD Remaster is a really cool example of this. And Gabby, if you don't mind, I'd like to read you out this thing it says from Resident Evil's website about the remaster.
Mm-hmm.
Experience the world-class remaster that brought the 1996 horror classic back to life. The original 2002 remaster not only featured reimagined HD environments and characters, but also enhanced vocal performances to create an even more terrifying retelling of the original story. And yeah, I think they themselves have managed to sum up what a remaster is excellently here as well.
Yeah, that's true. So they don't actually change the story. It's still the original story, but you got better voice acting and yeah, just better quality of the graphics, right?
Yeah, it's not a complete reinventing of the wheel, one might say. I have a feeling Resident Evil 2 is going to be remade on every single video game console of the future that's going to come out.
RE2? Yeah,
Yeah,
probably. I mean,
probably,
RE2 is
yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, let's move on. The next one, we got remakes. So the defining characteristics of remakes is that they are built from scratch. Literally, these games are being remade. So, how much the remakes resemble the original can kind of be different to each other. They can include additions or entire changes to even the storyline or changes to iconic plot twist, which is a plot twist on its own, in my honest opinion. But yeah, the form of the entire game can change. The only remaining resemblance being the very essence of the game, like the key characters, the setting, the gameplay elements, but not really necessarily the gameplay mechanics.
Yeah, so basically everything can be reinvented here for a remake. I guess Final Fantasy VII would be like a really good example to use here. So if you think about this one, so it was originally released in 1997. It's a role-playing game developed by Square for the PS1. Since the game was massively successful and having such in-depth story, in 2020 Square Enix released the first part of Final Fantasy VII, and the second part was released earlier just last year in February 2024. Yes, they had to split it into a trilogy. They built the entire game from the ground up, and after 23 years, as expected, there was going to be a massive graphic improvement. There was new gameplay, and the details and the depth of the original story, though, that is still there. But you have to imagine, like, how much actually changed. I mean, it turned into one game into like a trilogy now, a remake trilogy. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I know it's technically quite hard to call this a complete remake because we're not actually done experiencing the whole Final Fantasy VII story because we're still waiting for part 3. But I think this one kind of hit the nail on the head because you got really newly improved graphic, more realistic, it's a lot prettier, and yeah, kind of very different gameplay, really. And yeah, finally, we got reboots. So, reboots go beyond remakes. While remakes recreate a single game from the ground up, reboots clear an entire franchise and fully redevelop everything from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think the best example of this would be Tomb Raider when the franchise rebooted in 2013. Basically, everything that happened in the narrative and story of Tomb Raider up until this point in the 10 plus past games just didn't take place. It started again from new, just like when we had the Tobey Maguire Spider Man and now well, not now, but then afterwards the Andrew Garfield Spider Man. It's the exact same thing happening. The franchise gets a do over, if you will. So to be fair to the game developers, the magazines and the player ones, yeah, the lines are quite blurry between the remasters and the remakes and the reloadings and the revolutions and the recyclables and
Yeah,
all the
and the
other
what have yous,
yes,
basically.
all of those. It is very murky territory. Right. Now, so player one, how did you get on with the pop quiz? Let me give you the answer. Right. So, obviously, we do not know how many remakes have actually been made in total because, I mean, as you can tell, the definitions are already kind of like really difficult. So, Wikipedia does, however, have a list of remakes for video games, and it has at least 600 of them. So, yeah, we're
That's a lot, yeah.
yeah, it's a very interesting number to look at because obviously, like I said, there is no official list anywhere. So when you do get to see one that's trying to be, quite comprehensive, 600, wow. I don't know if I expected more or less though.
Yeah, I'm not really sure actually, but I thought it would be less somehow. But anyway, yeah, so we got at least 600 of these. So let's take a look at some of these. It was profitable for Atari to make conversions for arcade games for their Atari 2600 home console, even if the end product was often much uglier, I would say, than their arcade counterparts.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, the conversion of Space Invaders for the 2600 has been cited as a big reason for the console's rise in popularity, so far as to quadruple sales of the console. But actually, it's quite rare for the other way around, for games from other platforms get remade for the arcades because you know what? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Because yeah,
Why would you play your inferior home console games on the arcade? Like, who wants that? Get
yeah.
out of here.
But actually, in 1985, it actually happened. Sega did exactly this by remaking the computer game Choplifter and the Atari 2600 game Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns into the arcade. And you know what? When Sega did this, they broke away from the previous, normalcy of conversions and may have started a bit of a trend after remaking this two games into the arcade version because Sega was happy to add extra content and improve both the gameplay and the graphics of the game that they remade for the arcade. And yeah, I think we kind of okay to start calling these remakes instead of conversions now.
Yeah, you're right. Let's start calling them remakes.
Yeah, you're right, because it's less confusing to just call it remakes, I guess. But yeah, Sega actually added things like new enemies, new environments. They created the old and made it a lot prettier. They improved their understanding of what makes the game a better game in general.
As we progress to the 90s, to a time when we already have a small number of generations of home consoles now, we start to witness games being remade that were classics previously, but have aged in graphics. So developers start to remake their earliest games for newer consoles, or in terms of computers, to make better use of CD technology. Noteworthy examples here are Mario All Stars for the SNES in 1993, which was a collection of 4 NES Mario games remade for the SNES, and also classic PC adventure games. They also had their own line of remakes happening, things such as King's Quest and Space Quest, with CDs replacing floppy disks, adding audible speech, and other fun things to improve the game. It was much better for the environment too, since those 12 floppy disk games could now just fit onto one CD, you know what I mean, Gabby?
Yeah, definitely.
And one more thing I do want to talk about as well is flipping the concept of remakes on its head completely. There's a growing community of game developers creating so called D-makes as well. These D-makes are games that are made to purposefully play and look like games that were made in previous decades, despite being brand new actually though. There's a large number of cool things unique to these D-makes, and among them are like the brand new nostalgic experience that you get from playing something that looks old even though it came out yesterday, and it's obviously also very optimized for our modern computers, so you could be playing like a game that is so much fun, but it's perhaps, less than the size of an MP3. So some examples of remakes are Mega Man 9, for example, that was released in 2008, but it's got like 8-bit graphics that resemble the NES visuals, and it looks really, really cool. But does it look as cool as Bloodborne PSX, which is a remake of Bloodborne, but in the low polygon style of a PlayStation 1 game? And that is pretty cool too, let me tell you, Gabby.
Yeah, no, that's definitely really cool because you can actually fit that on PSX. And yeah, I wouldn't have thought about that. So, as you can see, Player One, remakes give games and gaming culture a breath of fresh air. In the mainstream, for example, developers for AAA games take very little risk with how their games are being played.
Yeah, so for example, I cannot wait for a time when Mirror's Edge is going to get its long-awaited remake, of course, because it's a relatively popular and successful game. It's new, it was fresh, and it wasn't afraid to take risks. But obviously, it didn't exactly cause many games like it to be made afterwards either. So you don't really get anything like Mirror's Edge unless you play Mirror's Edge. if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a really good game. It's a bit of a shame that they haven't done more with it.
Yeah, there's not much in terms of like that kind of free running first person style of game, right? So, and this is what we mean by knowing that, like, most likely in the next 10, 20 years, hopefully, if everything goes okay, you can expect a Mirror's Edge remake to be taking place, right? And then we get another one of those games back that, haven't created a genre for themselves.
Yeah, it's definitely nice that remakes have the power to bring back to us some of that creative thinking, trying to develop games that do something different.
So, Player One, we hope we have been able to refresh your memory on all things related to remakes, remasters, revivals, reboots, reloads, redevelopments, revolutions.
Yeah, that's quite a lot actually. So, Player One, what's your favorite remake, remaster, revival, or reboot? Or do you think games should be forever kept in their original form? Well, you know what? Let us know. Drop us a message on our website, gaminghistory.club. New episodes of Gaming History Club are released every other Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club.
Come back in a couple of weeks, Player One, where you might be tested if you can create a game from scratch in just 24 hours. See ya.